This is Gridiron Graduates, a weekly podcast covering all things football. Episode number 13, Pre-Board, recorded August 25th, 2015.
Yo, what up, doggy dogs from the east side? It's the boy, Bill Wild, hanging up with my sidekick, Ian Wharton. How we doing, boy?
Yo. I am great. Especially hearing that.
Well, yes, welcome to our edition of Yo MTV Raps.
Brought to you by Straight Outta Compton.
That's right. We're straight out of Twitter here, straight out of the NFL. Say straight out of Compton. This is straight out of the Gridiron Graduates.
Fantastic movie, by the way. If you're on the fence of seeing it, you should definitely see it.
I have actually not seen it yet, but a lot of people are talking about it, and it certainly seems really popular. So, I found it funny though. Dolphins coach Joe Philbin actually said he had never heard of Dr. Dre until he showed his team Straight Outta Compton.
Funky Fresh Joe is that doesn't surprise me about him. Yeah. He's not exactly the coolest guy in the room.
He certainly seems kind of the old school type guy, and not in the rap world or rap sense.
That's
pop
right.
Culture sense.
Yeah. He's an interesting guy, but yeah. I saw that too, and I was like, man, you're like 55 years old. Like, how have you never heard of that era of music? I mean, I don't know. Especially working around professional athletes.
Yeah, really, and especially down in Miami,
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of, rap music and whatnot, certainly popular down in that area, but hey, to each their own, I guess.
Yeah, yep.
In any event, let's get down to business for the reason we're actually here. We're not here to talk about rap because I'm not that big into rap, so I wouldn't know much to talk about anyway. Let's actually talk football, shall we?
Sounds good.
I think the first thing we should talk about, obviously the big news of the week, Jordy Nelson, Packers wide receiver, out for the season with a torn ACL. Just a terrible injury for such a great player, such unfortunate to see. And I remember sitting there watching the game, watching the play as it happened, and I'm thinking to myself, this is almost exactly like how Reggie Wayne tore his ACL. Like the image of Reggie Wayne, like getting his foot stuck in the turf, and then his knee buckling or whatnot. I just got that image. I'm thinking this is almost similar. I know he was able to jump up and walk off, and he seemed, it was only a little bit of a limp. He seemed fine, but boy, I guess looks can be deceiving.
Yeah, ACLs are really weird because sometimes you'll see guys like tear their knees to shreds, and I think he jogged off the field even, like to the locker room, and you would think that would hurt, but some people, if you talk to some people that have actually had it done, some people say it's one of the worst pains they've ever felt. Some people say it didn't hurt at all.
Yeah.
I sure can't explain that. It's definitely devastating, though. I mean, what do you think about that receiving core now that they lost basically a top 7 receiver in the NFL?
Yeah, losing Jordy, obviously it's going to hurt them because other than Cobb, no one has the talent level of Nelson. No one has really the trust factor that you see between Rodgers and Nelson. But without a doubt, there's still talent on this team. I'm not going to sit here and say it's a death knell for the Packers. You still have Randall Cobb out there who, as we know, is one of the top slot receivers now in the NFL. And boy, do the Packers look good now re-signing him before free agency even started. How lucky are they to get him back? And then obviously Devontae Adams, who a lot of guys, including myself, are really high on.
Yep.
I'm really excited to see now what he can do in a featured role. So, there's replacement, just obviously not at the level of Jordy. And then you have up and coming guys like Jeff Janis, who seems to be the favorite of draft Twitter right now.
Yeah, especially Metrics Twitter.
Yeah.
He's a really interesting case study because, and I tweeted this out, and a lot of the same people that went to the Senior Bowl, not this past year, but the year before, agreed when I was talking to guys like Jeff Risdon, Emery Hunt, guys like that. He was really bad. Like, Jeff Janis was really bad as, like, a receiver, and we knew about his freak athleticism, but he didn't play like it. And I worry that he's more of like a shorts and t-shirts guy than a good football player. It's weird. He has like a cult following, so I'll probably get more hate tweets from this. Because I got some really surprising responses to that. But it's whatever. I mean, it doesn't bother me. Like I said, I just report on what I saw watching the guy in college. It is what he is. If he develops, that's great. But, he's going to produce. He's going to produce if he plays because he's playing with Aaron Rodgers. There's pretty much you plug and play any old Joe Schmo and they're going to play. And he's just super athletic. So that's going to buy him, some things that regular receivers can't do, more physically limited receivers. It's going to buy him, A, one, more opportunities, and B, he's physically capable of just doing more than maybe more limited players. So I think he's not obviously not going to be like Jordy, but I think he'll be able to fulfill some sort of role for that team. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because like some people felt that the Packers receiving core is so deep that it's not like a devastating injury. But the reality is that if you take out Devontae Adams, they don't have anybody that's played more than like 30 snaps in a game. So they don't have depth. Like, yeah, they've got talent. Ty Montgomery his stock was very low last draft season, mostly because of a really poor senior year at Stanford. And then, I just talked about Janis. I think besides, unless if you're a metric freak, there's no real reason to be overly optimistic about him. I'm like you. I was super high on Devontae Adams, had him as a top 15 player in last year's draft class, which a lot of that was projection because he was pretty raw coming out of Fresno. But all of a sudden, I kind of subscribed to that theory at first that, Green Bay is going to be fine. I think they will be okay, but because of Aaron Rodgers and Eddie Lacy and a great offensive line, but there's, I think, more reason to concern than I originally had thought. Now that I'm really letting it settle in, and I've looked at their depth chart. I'd like to see this team either go out and get a guy like James Jones if he's cut in Detroit to kind of add that veteran presence, or maybe even explore a trade to see if there's another veteran that can step in quickly into their system and produce.
Yeah, and I guess I'm kind of in the same boat and thinking that they'll still be a Super Bowl contender in my eyes. Just
yeah.
Maybe the gap has closed a little bit. Maybe I'm not as sure that they're going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl as I was, say, a couple weeks ago when we originally made our picks.
It's hard too because like the whole NFL just feels so open.
Yeah.
Like there's not that many standout teams, and it's. We talked about it before. I feel like Seattle may be the best team, but can they do it for a third year in a row? That's
the only thing.
That's the huge question.
Yeah, that's the only thing that kind of holds me back from picking them because, I mean, first of all, it's hard to get back to a second Super Bowl in a row.
Yeah.
Let alone 3 in a row.
Right.
Because now you really have a target on your back.
And things pile up, like injuries.
Yeah.
We've already seen that with them. They haven't really fixed a lot of their holes offensive line-wise.
Right.
It's an incredible feat. I mean, when's the last time a team went to 3 consecutive Super Bowls? It's been a while.
Yeah, I think those poor Buffalo Bills are the last team to do it.
I believe that's correct. Off the top of my head, that sounds right. So,
yeah.
I mean, if they do it, that's just an incredible accomplishment.
Especially in today's NFL.
Right.
We talk about just winning one Super Bowl in the salary cap era.
Right.
And now we're potentially talking about a team that can go to 3 straight. But without a doubt, I think these are still the top 2 teams,
Yeah.
at least in the NFC.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think Philadelphia's up there yet. I don't think Dallas is there yet.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about Arizona too. I'm just not seeing it yet with Arizona. You know,
No.
I'm still a little skeptical on them, especially with the questions along the offensive line there. You know, Bobby Massey suspended the first couple games. DJ Humphries is in Bruce Arians' doghouse, and he's been in there for seemingly all of camp, which is surprising to me because I was a fan of Humphries coming out of Florida. So to see all these negative reports on him is a little bit surprising to me. And then I think interior they're having problems too.
Yeah, they've had some injuries. Ayupati out for a few weeks.
Yeah, their big free agent signing is now out, so there you go.
Yeah,
another big hit.
I think Humphries will be okay. I think the plan for him was to start next year, anyways, when Bobby Massey's gone.
Yeah.
In free agency, so I mean, I don't think that's too worrisome. And he's also adjusting to a new weight, and he didn't have a ton of experience in college either because he had a lot of injury issues. I think he'll be okay. I was pretty high on him as well. I think he was my top tackle actually in the draft. I know people like to rush to judgment on a lot of these rookies, but some positions, especially more than others, you just kind of got to give them extra time because they got to adjust to a lot of things, and one of them is simply just weight. They need to add strength. They need to adjust their diet and change their lifestyle a little bit. Not that they were living unhealthy before, but it's a whole new weight program in the NFL, and you never know what the Cardinals want him to do either. So,
right.
But yeah, that is an interesting observation because when they originally drafted him, you're right. There was that talk of, is this guy going to start over Massey, and then what's that going to mean for Massey? So it is a little interesting that team is teetering very close to a boomer bust team in my eyes. Like I could see them be really good again with Palmer healthy, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they really struggle and they're really not the standout team that they were last year.
And it's certainly asking a lot for was he 35 years old, I think? Something like that. A 35-year-old quarterback coming off an ACL tear to really continue to perform at that high level that we've seen. And you know, unfortunately, that's always been the problem for Palmer. So many injuries have just really hurt him throughout his career. You know, even going way back to that playoff game against the Steelers. And, you know, that was really the start of the downfall. One thing I do want to talk about a little bit too is kind of comparing these two injuries to these top 2 receivers, and we kind of got into it talking about Green Bay, but yeah, I guess some people have kind of debated a little bit whether Jordy's injury is more detrimental to the Packers, or is Kelvin Benjamin's injury more detrimental to the Panthers? What's your take on
that? I'm gonna go with Kelvin Benjamin's is more dire for the Panthers, and the reason why, it's a tough choice because, and here's the reason why I'm going to go with Carolina and Kelvin, because there's so little else around Cam, and all of a sudden, and I think we talked about this before, how when you're elevating the number 2 receiver to the number 1, that's not necessarily the biggest jump on the depth chart. It may be that you're forcing number 2, 3, 4, 5 up on the depth chart. And are those guys going to be ready to make that big of a jump in production and targets and a role in the offense? And it's just really hard when that team doesn't have great running back depth. They don't really have a good offensive line in terms of passing the ball. They're not proven in that regard. They're a very good run blocking line, but I think that's a little bit more damaging for what Cam Newton needs to do on a weekly basis. Like we talked about with Green Bay. They'll be able to get by on a weekly basis without Jordy. The question is, can they get over the hump without Jordy in the playoffs? I think that's their big question. I don't think they're going to be regular season. I don't think it's going to matter that much. Playoffs is where that stuff matters, especially with young receivers, and that's going to be my take. I think they're both pretty harmful, but I'm going to go with Kelvin right now, unless the fun just like goes bananas for some reason. But I mean, there's no reason to think he's going to do that well.
Right. And I agree with you there. I've said after Kelvin Benjamin, there's not a whole lot on the Panthers depth chart, and you brought up a great point. It's, yeah, it's partly Devin Funchess, who's still very raw, moving up to the number 1 role. It's also more Corey Brown moving up, Jericho Cotchery moving up.
Yep.
Can these guys step up in a more featured role?
Right.
And that's going to be the biggest question. So that's why I think the Panthers are going to be hurting more with Kelvin. And then to compound the problem, they lose Frank Alexander for the season.
Yeah, that was a bad injury.
Yeah, because, they don't have much after him as far as pass rush goes either.
And they were already losing out because of Greg Hardy's absence, which,
right.
I mean, he missed time last year, but to lose both your starting defensive ends, and, I mean, now you're relying on Coney Ealy, who looked good against the Dolphins, but that's it. I mean, he at least was a viable drafted talent. All of a sudden, it's like, who lines up across from him that's a legitimate scare? I don't know if they have a legitimate pass rusher. Well, I mean, they have Charles Johnson, of course. But on other situations where, because Ely's he's got the pedigree, but he's a little bit more of a run stuffer. So I meant to say Johnson instead of Ely, so I apologize. Who's going to line up across from Johnson? Is it going to be Ely on a play-by-play basis, or, so it hurts your depth and things like that. I'm starting to be down more on this team on Carolina. All of a sudden, I think I might have even picked them to win the division. If so, I'm starting to lean more toward that might be a top 10 pick team.
Yeah.
Come as the season gets near, it's very hard to be optimistic. I mean, that was a team that was, if the Dolphins and Panthers had played in a regular season game, the Dolphins were up 14. They were on pace to be up 14-0 in the first quarter while starters were playing. So, I mean, you're looking at possible blowout in that game, and it's just really hard for me to see this Panthers team galvanizing with such little talent available.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way. I see this team maybe as like a 6-win team, maybe at best now.
Yeah.
Because they're gonna have problems getting to the passer now. And as we talked about, in a division like the NFC South, as weak as it is, you still have, one really good quarterback, a better than average quarterback, and then an up-and-coming rookie.
Yep.
As the 3 guys that they have to go after. So you're going to have problems. That's going to hurt the Panthers, in my view. So let's move on. Speaking of rookies, that was actually a nice little segue there. The top 2 quarterbacks were both in action on national TV again. Jameis Winston on ESPN against the Bengals, and Marcus Mariota was on Fox against the Titans. Did you get a chance to see them, and what was your take on the 2 of them this week?
I did. So, first off, I'll start with Jameis because number 1 pick, so he's going to go first. I was very impressed with Jameis Winston. This was the guy that we thought he would be coming out, and if you were a fan of Jameis Winston, this was the game that you wanted to see. Like, this is the performance that you really needed to kind of confirm what you had seen in college as far as translating to the NFL. We saw pocket presence. We saw anticipation. I mean, his anticipation on crossing routes over the middle, downfield up the seam. He hit 3 throws that were just like jaw-dropping. That you say, okay, that's the Ben Roethlisberger type prospect that we thought that we had seen at Florida State. And that's only on 13 throws. And there were a few drops in there, and he still went 8 of 13. So, very impressive performance. He was overcoming his extended motion, which is very good to see, again, with anticipation. He has a long delivery. We know that. And that's what's going to get him into trouble at times. However, he was overcoming that. He was getting the ball out very early, but he knew exactly what was happening. He could read defenders. I was just very impressed with him. He looked like a completely different player from the first week. He looked more poised. He looked ready for the spotlight, and that's all key. That's a big part of it. And I think that first game that we saw, a big part of it, honestly, was just that I think he was flat. I think he was just rattled. I think he wasn't ready for what that game was. And that sounds weird because it's preseason and the guy won a national title and all that, but he just looked a lot more calm and a lot more prepared from a mental standpoint. Mariota, I thought, played well. I thought he played better than the first game. He's very accurate. He did well outside of the pocket, did well inside of the pocket for the most part. You can tell his lack of arm strength still. And that's something that maybe hopefully develops over time as his body grows. He hits the weight room a little bit, gets a stronger arm, because what he does is, especially when he's pressured, he has the tendency to fall away from his throws. He doesn't have the arm strength to do that and get away with it. He should have been picked off twice, by my count, and he was able to get away with it. Now it's okay because stat book didn't say he didn't throw them. So, and again, he did stick several throws. My only concern with him is moving forward is to continue to make those tight throws. Don't be afraid to make those tight throws. You just have to beat it. You have to beat good coverage with either anticipation or great accuracy, and so that's going to require him to have very tight mechanics. So it was a good performance. I didn't think it was a great performance, especially for compared to Winston, who just really blew the doors off the entrance. So it was encouraging for both, but a little bit more encouraging for Winston, especially because I thought he had the rougher debut.
Yeah, and I thought they both played well too. I'll mention on Mariota. I think one of the things for me is he's at least starting to show that he can do some of the things that some of his biggest critics were really questioning. And I know this is going to sound really basic, but he's showing he can control a huddle and call plays in a huddle. He can take snaps under center. He can play at a slower tempo. He doesn't necessarily have to be the high-speed, up-tempo offense. He can slow it down if he needs to. And, for a lot of the naysayers, those were the biggest gripes against him. So at least at the very core, he's showing he can do that, and it's something he can build on. He should have had a touchdown as well, but Dexter McCluster flat out dropped it.
Yeah.
But you're right, he did have that one bad throw that should have been intercepted, and he got away with it. But overall, certainly taking strides, certainly making improvements, and should be good to go for the season. I will say this on the Titans too. I'm not completely, but starting to come around a little bit on them as a team. More so on the defensive line.
Yeah.
I thought the defense played pretty well. Granted, the Rams' offensive line isn't the greatest, but it was still encouraging to see the Titans get penetration, get pressure. And Nick Foles was Nick Foles.
Oh,
so
my goodness, that interception throw.
To Parrish Cox.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yikes. So I don't know. Maybe they won't be as bad as I initially thought. I still think they're a ways away from being playoff contenders, but they might keep some games competitive. They might hang in there a little bit. As far as Jameis and the Bucks, again, he like you said, he made great throws. He is really starting to handle himself well, and I'm certainly excited to see really what both of these guys are going to do this week as we come to dress rehearsal week. Of course, if there's any week to be any bit excited about the preseason, it's this week, since we'll actually get to see the starters play.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And for you, for this week, how do you feel about this week? I mean, I'll give you an example, because some people feel like this is really the week where you should be playing your guys two or three quarters, and that's very important. And And then some people feel like it's very situation driven because if you look at a situation like Miami, they're going to be probably starting Dallas Thomas at left tackle because their top two left tackles are hurt, Brandon Albert and Jason Fox. That's going to leave Ryan Tannehill to play multiple quarters with someone who hasn't played left tackle in a long time, possibly compromising his health, or it could be worse too. It could be a tropical storm in Miami that night. I know that it's very possible that that'll happen. For teams, do you feel like the risk is worth getting into a quote unquote rhythm, which really there's no proof of that. It's just really something that we feel is real.
Yeah.
But where do you come out on that?
And it was interesting. We kind of saw something like this last week when it was reported that Green Bay was initially going to put out their starters for about a half.
Yep.
Kind of dialed that back a bit when Don Barclay was inserted as the starting left tackle instead of David Bakhtiari. And first off, woof, was he bad?
Yeah, it was.
But to get back to the question, I see your point as far as if it's not necessarily the quote unquote starting unit that you're going to go into, maybe you look at it and say, okay, like you mentioned with Ryan Tannehill, how much do we want to risk him getting out there? Because I guess to play a little devil's advocate here, when we talk about the rhythm we get into and this being the dress rehearsal, you still have a whole week and a half before you play a meaningful game.
Yeah.
And, because obviously next week, these starters are barely going to play at all.
Yeah, if at all.
Maybe, 2 series at most, a lot 1, some won't even play. So, I guess it can be situation-based. Like you look at a team like the Eagles, I guess a lot of people are going to be wondering how much are you going to want to put Bradford out there. Because, last week he was just getting his feet wet, finally getting on the field. He was only out there for 1 series.
Yeah.
So, how much do you push it this week, especially against a team like the Packers?
Right.
Well, in my opinion, I think that it's going to be a good matchup for the Eagles, especially their defense. The talk was, this revamped secondary. Well, here you go. You get a chance to defend Randall Cobb. You get a chance to defend Devontae Adams.
Yep.
So
Aaron Rodgers. Yep.
So it's a good test going into the season. But so I can see where you're coming from as far as looking at how your team is right now, and then kind of going with a little bit of game plan as far as how much do you want to push your starters to try to minimize the risk of them getting hurt before the regular season starts. And to that note, I think for those that are saying that are using the Jordy injury to argue that the preseason should be shortened, I think is silly.
Yeah.
I mean, injuries like this can happen anytime. We saw it with the Kelvin Benjamin injury. It was a non-contact injury during practice.
Yep.
So are we saying practices should be cut?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty ridiculous too. I had seen people suggesting that, and I mean, I think you're just missing the point if you're suggesting that. I mean, you could get hurt doing anything. I mean, it's just like anything in life. You could die doing anything. I mean, that may sound sad and morbid, but I mean, it doesn't take some crazy event to get hurt. It doesn't matter whether you're an athlete. It doesn't matter if you're not an athlete. Whatever your situation, it doesn't take much.
And
so
you could casually be working at your job, and one false step or whatever, and you're hurt.
Something happens.
So, yeah.
Yep. Orlando Scandrick was the same way. So, for the record, I'm with you. I think you play your guys. I don't think you worry about the injuries. Obviously, you don't want to show them unnecessary risk. But these guys still need to play. The only way that they're going to really get better.
They need the reps, absolutely.
And especially if you look at, Philadelphia's situation, I was a little disappointed that all they gave was Bradford's 1 series. He looked okay. He wasn't as sharp as I think that he will be. And I think that's really the hope for them, is that he will gradually improve week by week by week, I think that's fair to expect, and it's definitely what I'm counting on and why I picked them to go to the Super Bowl. But it is very situational based, but I think you play. I think that's the point of the game, and you overcome adversity. Guys are going to get hurt, and the question is not if you're going to get hurt. The question is when you're going to get hurt.
When and how.
And that's right. And how can you overcome those obstacles when that happens to your team? I mean, trust me, no one wants these injuries to happen. However, in the same breath, I refuse to feel bad because they happen. You're an increased risk playing these games. When you're that big, your tendons don't grow. So you're putting all that stress on your body. Something's bound to happen at some point. So the guys that get away with 15-year careers healthy are extremely lucky. I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got guys like Frank Gore who have had huge injury issues, and yet they're still surviving. They're still plugging away. So I'm with you. I think if it's going to Miami specific example, if it's tropical storm level, I don't put my starters on the field for very long because I don't want any. That to me is extra exposure to injury. But just in general, though, I mean, one player being hurt leading to, should I not play this guy? I don't think that should be the case.
Yeah, because, and that's kind of thing. Like, if you go into a game scared you're going to get hurt,
you're going to get hurt.
That's when you're going to get hurt, yeah.
Yep.
You know, if you play at full speed, you're hitting at full speed, running at full speed, and whatnot, you'll be fine. That's something I learned when I played a little bit, put air quotes around the word play, high school football. But that's something you learn. If you go full speed, you're going to be fine. And if something happens, well, that's unfortunate, but, it's bound to happen, and the risk going in.
Yeah.
It's not like no one can ever sit there and say, oh, yeah, I'm never going to get hurt.
Right.
I mean, if a guy like Adrian Peterson, who's like a god amongst men as far as how athletic he is and how in shape he is, if a guy like him can get hurt, then
the rest of us mortals.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully, though, I will say, hopefully we've reached the end of these major injuries because we're seeing guys go down that could affect the championship picture.
Yeah.
Skandrick going down, I think, only really hurts
Skandrick's
Cowboys.
Dallas, yes.
Yeah, big time. That's a huge loss. That was their best secondary member. And all of a sudden, it's kind of like Philadelphia, where you lose Ja'Cory Shepard, you lose Brandon Boykin to trade, obviously not injury, but there's no real difference in terms of this year why they lost him. Your depth gets tested quickly, and hopefully, for the sake of competition and quality play, hopefully that trend comes to a grinding halt.
Yeah, I think that's why we don't wish for these big name injuries, and I think that's another reason why people are so harped up about using the Jordy injury to shorten the preseason because it's such a big name.
Yeah.
As Jordy Nelson. And
I hate to say it too, and I think that fantasy football plays a big part of that.
Yeah, it does. You're right.
And I will also say, though, I don't blame the people that express disappointment for fantasy reasons. Now, I will say, I think it should be implied that we all at least somewhat care about Jordy's health, as like on a personal level. Like, even if you don't like them, it would be ridiculous to be rooting for someone to get hurt.
Right.
So, assuming that I'm going to assume that people are decent and I give them the benefit of the doubt. Like if someone says something about their fantasy team being affected by an injury, I take the benefit of the doubt and I say, okay, I'm assuming that you also care that, and hope that person gets well just for their own good. But In general, though, it does not bother me when people make a complaint because of their injury, because of their fantasy football. Because we need to realize fantasy football is a huge form of entertainment, and it's a huge hobby for people. I mean, people care about it on a very mainstream level. So
Yeah.
I think it is a very serious thing it's an e-sport, and I'm all for it. I'm not a huge fantasy player myself because I've had some very bad luck in recent years as far as keepers and whew, I don't even want to tell those horror stories, but yeah, definitely. So I just wanted to mention that because it seems like whenever someone gets hurt, especially a playmaker, people get more worked up about people complaining about fantasy football injuries
Yeah.
than I actually see people complaining about fantasy football injuries. It's the weirdest thing, It's one of those things where everyone's complaining that people are complaining about it, but I literally don't see people complaining about it unless if it's just like really crazy fans or something.
Yeah. I do have to note that I was just in a draft about 2 weeks ago. It's just a kind of funly with a bunch of friends online. I had actually taken Jordy Nelson,
Oh no!
but all was not lost because I had the turn pick. My keeper was Le'Veon Bell, and then I had the turn pick. To pair with Jordy Nelson, I took Randall Cobb.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
I was
Made
being a
out
little
quite
sneaky. I
well.
was like, you know what? I'll take Jordy, and I'll take Randall as well. Give me the whole Packers offense. So that so it stings, yeah, but it doesn't hurt too bad because I was just able to slot in a guy like Keenan Allen, and I also had I have Allen Robinson, and a couple other guys. So I got Victor Cruz late.
Nice.
So,
Actually, like a number of these guys are guys I just added to my team on a recent draft as well. So,
yeah,
and Cruz is interesting too because we're not going to get too deep into fantasy, but depending on what site you're using, he's buried in the
yeah,
wide receiver queue. I know on ESPN he is at least, and I think he's in like 125 or something. I mean, yeah, he's had injury issues, but for the same price, you're not going to find a running back or a wide receiver with a similar upside as Victor Cruz. I mean,
right.
let's realize for a second, this is a number one receiver when he's good and ready to go. He's a big time impact player. So
Yeah,
if your draft's coming up, add him to your queue and wait around until like I don't know, 9th, 10th round, you may be able to steal a starting caliber receiver when all of your opponents are taking number 2 and number 3 receivers on other teams.
or if they're being even sillier and taking kickers and defenses, but hey, that's their business.
Yeah,
But yeah, even
please,
just from a
go ahead and take the top defense.
yeah,
in
that's
the round
fine
if you'd
with me.
like.
I say, you guys gladly take a defense in round 9. I'll scoop up these players. But even from an on-field standpoint, like it's almost like people are forgetting. Like, yeah, he's coming off the injury, but it's almost like we're forgetting how good of a player he was before he got injured.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, he was so good.
I mean, yeah, Odell Beckham kind of has a little bit to do with that, but
Sure.
For as good as Odell Beckham is, is he going to be able to do it on his own?
Yeah, and it's a scary trio they've got there too because Ruben Randall's a pretty decent threat as well.
Yeah.
Definitely can't count him out, and he's definitely a forgotten man as well. Yeah, and that's a big, and I think that's as a third receiver, that'll really benefit him because he doesn't have to get the pure volume of those first 2 receivers in that offense, but he can still make a pretty big impact as a third guy.
And I tell you what, starting to become an underrated fourth receiver for them is James Jones. There's a lot of rumblings now that James Jones is actually going to stick on the roster as the fourth receiver.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he's played really well in preseason.
Yeah. He's not a starting caliber receiver. We saw that last year in Oakland.
Yeah.
But he could still be a viable third, fourth receiver. So you're talking about a solid 4-deep lineup at receiver for the New York Giants. It's just a shame the rest of the roster is pretty down.
Yeah.
Talking O-line, D-line, and just about it, especially at safety.
Yeah.
When you take Brandon Merriweather of all people,
Oof.
you have problems.
Times are rough. It's one of the shallowest positions in the NFL, and definitely seeing the effects of it there, and also seeing it in Oakland, where they picked up Taylor Mays, who's been a major disappointment for some, considering his pedigree.
I mean, what is this? Already his third team in about 3 months.
Yeah.
You know, cut from the Vikings, just cut from the Lions.
Yep. Probably won't make the Raiders. It'd be hard to see why he'd make that team. It's just, but he was good. He was a good college player, and I think that's something nice to fall back on.
And you know, he has that connection now with Ken Norton as defensive coordinator.
That's true, and maybe they use him like that. Yeah, and they could use him maybe more like a linebacker role, which is kind of interesting because they have Malcolm Smith as well. Don't forget that they picked him up from Seattle this offseason, and he's kind of a Taylor Mays type player, undersized linebacker, more of a coverage player than he is like a necessarily like a traditional linebacker, which is kind of going to be like Taylor Mays. He's more of a linebacker than a traditional defensive back type of player. So it's just kind of interesting to see what they've got there, and I'll be interested to see if he makes that final roster because you're right, he does have a relationship there. Maybe that'll play a big part into him sticking on the roster.
Yeah. And let's change gears a little bit. I guess we'll stick on the subject of these veterans moving on because, you know, injuries being a big part of the news this week, but certainly veteran players signing new deals also helped make news this week, including one certain quarterback that we hadn't heard from in a while that all of a sudden pops up and is back in the NFL, and that's Sexy Rexy, Rex Grossman, signing with the Falcons. I find that quite interesting that the Falcons go out and pick him up, but I guess they're not too thrilled with their backup quarterback situation right now.
That was really surprising to see. I know the Browns were talking about possibly signing him last year, and they never did, obviously. But yeah, it's bottom of the barrel out there. You know, I just did an article on the top free agents at the quarterback position. I'm sorry, not free agents. The top trade values, I should say, as backup quarterbacks around the league, and it's a tough market out there. I mean, Zach Mettenberger, Mike Glennon, I think are the two obvious guys because of their age. Derek Anderson is another possibility. Chase Daniel, Kansas City, but yeah, I mean, there's not really any long-term starters in that. I don't think, unless if we see a surprising turn of events for Mettenberger or Glennon, which I mean, I wasn't high on those guys coming out of college, so I'm going to be a little bit more pessimistic on them, anyways. But it'll be interesting to see because I don't know if he makes the roster, but it all depends. I mean, that's a team that's trying to make the playoffs, and I guess if you want to win a game or two, if Matt Ryan gets hurt, some people believe in veterans more than young guys, so it'll be interesting to see. It's definitely a surprising pickup, though.
Yeah, for sure. And then another veteran that just gets picked up this week is Mike Vick, signing with the Steelers. They go out and sign him after Bruce Gradkowski gets hurt in the preseason game. And just quick note, there were injuries galore in that game. What a mess.
Yeah.
We talked about Nelson. Marquise Pouncey's probably on his way to IR reserved.
Yep.
I think Demarius Randall got hurt in that game, so it was just amazing. But Mike Vick now the guy.
He'll probably end up the number 2.
I think he probably will be the number 2 because Lord knows Landry Jones ain't getting up there anytime soon.
No, he's looked really bad.
He has, so yeah, I think it's safe to assume that Mike Vick immediately slots in, which means he's essentially one play away from stepping in as a starter for the Steelers if Big Ben, God forbid, knock on wood, it doesn't happen. But if Big Ben goes down, Mike Vick's your starter, and
good luck with that. Yeah, good luck with that. He looked really bad last year. Took a ton of sacks, put the ball out there for basically anybody to have it between fumbles and interceptions. So
yeah, I mean,
he's a mess. He's
you could argue he hasn't looked good since that magical 2010 season with the Eagles.
Yeah, I would totally agree.
You could argue that, you know, the reason he was so good in that 2010 season was because no one could prepare for him. Because if you recall, Kevin Kolb was a starter going into 2010, and then he suffers the concussion
Mm.
in the opener against Green Bay, and steps Mike Vick, and
It was
all of a sudden,
explosive.
all of a sudden, this team is blowing up. They make it to the playoffs. Of course, they could also thank Deshaun Jackson with that punt return against the Giants for getting into the playoffs too. But then, things fell apart in the playoffs, and then it's been downhill for the Eagles. Well, or I should say downhill for Mike Vick since then. So, if Big Ben were to go down, I think the Steelers are in a little bit of trouble. Especially with, we just mentioned the injury to Marquise Pouncey. So you're going to have a bit of questions there in the middle of the offensive line. You still have some questions on the O-line. Can Bud Dupree, who has played a little bit better as the games have gone on, but can he do it on a consistent basis during the regular season? So, hopefully Ben stays up there and Mike's just there to hold the clipboard. And then another veteran we'll talk about a little bit too is Evan Mathis,
Yep.
who reportedly turned down $1.5 million more from another team to sign for potentially $4 million with the Broncos.
Yep.
And I actually saw some of your tweets about this. You're not so sold that he actually did turn down money from another team.
I'm not, and here's why. I mean, Drew Rosenhaus has a good relationship with the Miami Dolphins. Several of his clients, high-priced clients, have signed with the Dolphins, the big money deals, and even in the past when they haven't signed, when it's his guys, he's used Miami as leverage before in the media. He said that Miami's interested and what is and what not, and that's not always the case. It's normal for Miami to get used like that because they're often the big spender on the market, and they usually come in high with a good offer. But that wasn't the case with Mathis. I know that. I can tell you that right now. Miami was never going to spend that much on Mathis. They were never gonna sacrifice next year's cap space for him. They don't have much to begin with, and they like their guards. They like their young guards. They are subscribing to the draft and develop method, unless if you can get a guy like Ndamukong Suh in free agency, which they did, and they were never going to blow their load on Evan Mathis. So I can tell you that right now that Miami was not the team that was, and that was really the team that was hyped up to be the big spender on him. So, and at 30, in his mid 30s, it does not make sense for a non-competitive team to offer him $5.5 million this year.
Right.
It just doesn't. It makes no sense, especially when no one tried to trade for him in Philly. If Chip was not lying on that, and there's no reason to think that he is. And here's the thing too: is the only reason people know about Evan Mathis. He's a very good player, but Pro Football Focus is really the reason why people love Evan Mathis and have this envy of having Evan Mathis on their team. He's a good player. He's not a flashy player. He does his job every play. He's very consistent. However, he's not like this power, crazy, great guard that you think of when you think of, top-level guards. So it just doesn't make sense to me that there was actually a team trying to match his price tag when the whole reason he left Philadelphia was to get a bigger contract. I think he was just trying to save face because remember, Philadelphia is a contender. Say what you will, and I don't care if he didn't get along with Chip or if Chip didn't like him. If he was that great or if he was worth that money, they would have made it work.
Yeah.
We've seen it before. You deal with malcontents, you put up with it, and then you let them go eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So it smells fishy to me. And people saying, well, he said it. Evan Mathis was the one that said it. He obviously told all these reporters because every single reporter and their mother tweeted that he had that offer. So all that tells me is that he says it. That doesn't mean it's true. Now, I'm not saying it's not true either, but I'm not going to sit here and buy that crap.
Yeah.
I think the only teams that were going after him were contenders, and that $2.5 million guaranteed salary is probably what most teams were offering.
And, I guess again to play a little devil's advocate on Mathis, he was holding out too.
Yeah.
It's not like he was out there, every day in practice. Now, the reports were that he was eventually going to make his way back. But we don't know that for sure.
Right.
We can't sit here and speculate, like the day he got cut, we can't sit here and say, well, the next day or the next week he was going to show up.
Right.
So, if he was unhappy with his contract, fine, it's understandable.
But that's on him.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to be negative on the guy, but it's not like he'd been an outstanding guard his entire career. He was a decent guard, not great, when he was in Cincinnati.
Yep.
He
was in Miami previously too, and he was just a practice squad player. He was a washout. He was nothing special. So.
But it's funny that actually turned out to be one of the hits, the very few hits, for the Eagles when they had that big free agency splurge of 2011 after the lockout ended. The one that included Nnamdi Asomugha, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, and all that good stuff. He wound up being one of the few hits of that free agent haul. But as far as where he did land in Denver, I think is really good, because to me it felt. I'll admit I don't know how well their guards have been playing up to this point. The guards that they're currently in right now, but I remember tweeting that I think this is going to fill the void left by Orlando Franklin. I think Mathis can step in this kind of system as a zone blocking team and be productive for the Broncos, especially for a guy like C.J. Anderson in the backfield. And there's reports now that maybe I think Ronnie Hillman is who they're saying.
Yeah, Ronnie
like
Hillman.
The 1B. Someone was saying, I think it was Ronnie Hillman could be the 1B to C.J. Anderson's 1A. So in that sense, especially for a team that's going to run the ball more under Gary Kubiak, because, Peyton Manning's almost 40 years. He's, 39 now, I think, 38. You're not going to let him continue to sling the ball, especially after what we saw at the end of last season. Granted, he might be healthy now, but, I guess they just don't want to worry having that image from last season. They just don't want to see that repeat itself. So, for a team that's going to be, I would imagine, more run-focused, I think it's a good pickup for Denver to get him for as cheap as they did.
Oh, yeah. It definitely makes sense from a football standpoint. That's a huge upgrade.
Yeah, because I don't know what the percentage is. I didn't see the details. I just saw that it's, I guess if he plays a certain amount of snaps or certain percentage of snaps, he'll bump up to $4 million. The base is 2.5. He could earn up to $4 million, which isn't bad. And obviously, Denver's a contending team. I still feel this is a kind of a make or break season for Denver, but without a doubt, they're still a contender.
For sure.
So I guess one more thing, we'll just talk quick about the upcoming preseason schedule and kind of what we're looking forward to. So, what are you excited to see this week?
I'm going to be looking for teams. I'm going to be looking, again, still going to be looking at the young quarterbacks. Winston, Mariota, those are really my focus. I'm also going to be looking at guys like Vic Beasley. I want to see how Vic Beasley's progressing. He played very well last week. I think he's starting to really look like that stud that a lot of us felt like he was going to be. Obviously, it's early to see. We'll see if he ends up during that regular season. He's definitely a guy I'm going to be watching. I'll be watching other intriguing offenses around the league. I want to see the Eagles. I want to definitely see how Sam Bradford looks. I'm very intrigued in him. Like I said before, I was a fan of his in St. Louis, so I want to see if he can get back to his max potential and talent. And then kind of, we'll see. I want to see Jared Hayne as well, the running back phenomenon that's happening out in San Francisco.
Yeah, what a story that's become.
Yeah, absolutely. Guy is a ton of fun to watch. Tremendous return man. He's proving to be thus far. So I'm really interested to see him, to see what if he can continue at his rate. Who will you be looking for?
Just kind of scrolling through the game. Certainly some interesting matchups. Jets-Giants always playing this week. It's always fun when those two get together. And this season they play in the regular season, so that'll be fun. You mentioned Vic Beasley. He's actually facing the Dolphins, so you'll definitely get a chance to see Vic there. I guess you look at a team like the Panthers. Just continue to see how they play without Kelvin Benjamin. They go up against the Patriots. You get to see the Jaguars on CBS this week against the Lions, so we'll get a chance to see Blake Bortles, and hopefully he continues to develop. And yeah, I guess just some of the young guys. I keep mentioning Teddy Bridgewater just because I'm a huge fan of Teddy, and I love watching how he plays and just rooting for him. They're at Dallas this week. And then certainly the Eagles, like you mentioned. Like I mentioned earlier, I think this is a real good test for this Eagles team, both on offense and defense, because the Packers certainly have a really good defense, and then obviously we all know about the offense. Even without Jordy Nelson, they still have some tough receivers and tough offensive weapons that they have to go up against. And a guy like Byron Maxwell, is he going to, especially now with Jordy gone, is he going to shadow Randall Cobb? Or is he going to stay to one side? So that'll be interesting to see. And then I guess on Sunday you got a pair of national games. The Texans play the Saints. We know now that Brian Hoyer has been named the starter. So here's his chance to go out and show why he was named the starter. I still think Mallet eventually will make his way into the starting lineup, because I think you want to see what you have in him, especially after you traded for him. And then we talked about the Cardinals. They go up against the Raiders. So certainly this is the week that's interesting to watch, because as we mentioned, this is the quote-unquote dress rehearsal for the regular season. So it's certainly going to be a fun time to watch. And I guess with that, I think we'll wrap it up. I think, as always, got some good info out there, and another good hour talk there.
Absolutely, and we're just that much closer to these games really counting.
Yep, just 2 more weeks of preseason, and then 2 weeks tomorrow is the opener. And I think we talked about this last week. This Sunday is the first college game of the season, featuring North Dakota State. So, boy, it's getting close.
Definitely watch for North Dakota State's quarterback, Carson Wentz, and their left tackle, Mike Hogue. Those are two NFL prospects. I'll be charting Carson Wentz that night. I won't be able to do it live, but I will be able to do it that night. So definitely keep a watch out if you want to see one of the top 10 quarterback prospects in the country.
There you go. An early look at the 2016 draft from our boy Eaton. So until next week, as always, thanks so much for listening. Glad you did, and hope you enjoyed. Check us out on iTunes, and then, as always, hit us up on Twitter. For my buddy Ian Wharton, I am Bill Rossetti. We will see you next time on the Gridiron Graduates. Take care, my friends.